The sterile chill of the morgue seeped into Ruanawan's thin jacket, raising goosebumps on her arms. The air hung heavy, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the cloying sweetness of disinfectant, a scent that would forever be etched in her memory, a chilling reminder of this night. Her small hand, swallowed by Lu Chinchuan's much larger one, trembled. Each hesitant step down the long, brightly lit corridor felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss of despair. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd begged Lu Chinchuan not to make her. But he had insisted, his usually gentle eyes filled with a grim determination she couldn't understand. He kept saying it was important, that she needed to see. See what? Ruanawan squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. She already knew. She knew her mother was gone. The attendant, a gaunt man with weary eyes, stopped before a closed drawer. Ruanawan instinctively recoiled, burying her face in Lu Chinchuan's coat. She could hear the squeak of metal as the drawer slid open, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. Lu Chinchuan's grip tightened on her hand, a silent reassurance. He murmured something, words she couldn't quite decipher, lost in the roaring in her ears. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head. The world tilted. The stark white sheet, pulled taut over the still form, seemed to shimmer and waver before her eyes. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. Her mother, her beautiful, vibrant mother, reduced to this cold, unmoving object. A choked sob escaped her throat, a small, broken sound that shattered the sterile quiet. Lu Chinchuan knelt beside her, his face etched with a sorrow that mirrored her own. He didn't speak, only held her close, his presence a small anchor in the storm raging within her. Ruanawan reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold sheet. She wanted to touch her mother, to feel the warmth of her skin, the softness of her hair. But there was only icy stillness. With a surge of courage, she pulled back the sheet, revealing her mother's face. Jiang Jinji's eyes were closed, her expression serene, almost peaceful. But the unnatural pallor of her skin, the faint bluish tinge to her lips, screamed of the life that was no longer there. "Mommy," Ruanawan whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your hands are so cold." She took her mother's hand in hers, the small, delicate fingers dwarfed by Jiang Jinji's now lifeless ones. The coldness seeped into Ruanawan's bones, a chilling reminder of the finality of death. "Mommy, Mommy, don't leave Ruanawan." Lu Chinchuan watched, his heart aching for the small child. He had known this would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated the raw, gut-wrenching grief that emanated from Ruanawan. He cursed Huiziho, the man who had caused this devastation, the man who had driven his wife to such despair. He had promised Jiang Jinji he would protect Ruanawan, and he would keep that promise, no matter the cost. The attendant, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly explained the circumstances of Jiang Jinji's death. An apparent suicide, they had said. Found in the bathtub, wrists slashed. A note, discovered nearby, confirmed their suspicions. A note filled with despair, with apologies to Ruanawan, with accusations against Huiziho. Accusations of infidelity, of cruelty, of neglect. Accusations that painted a chilling portrait of a broken marriage and a desperate woman driven to the edge. Lu Chinchuan listened, his jaw clenched tight. He knew better. He knew Jiang Jinji was stronger than that. He knew she wouldn't abandon Ruanawan. Something didn't add up. The suicide felt staged. Too perfect, too convenient. He glanced at Ruanawan, her small body racked with sobs, her face buried in her mother's cold hand. He had to find the truth. He owed it to Jiang Jinji. He owed it to Ruanawan. He gently pulled Ruan away from her mother's body, his own emotions a turbulent mix of grief and simmering anger. He wrapped her in his arms, holding her close as she cried, her tears soaking his shirt. He whispered soothing words, empty promises he desperately hoped he could keep. He would find justice for Jiang Jinji. He would make sure Ruan was safe. He would expose Huiziho for the monster he was. He would make him pay. As they left the morgue, the cold night air felt like a slap in the face. Ruan clung to Lu Qinchuan, her small body trembling. The image of her mother, lying cold and still, was seared into her mind, a wound that would take a lifetime to heal. Lu Qinchuan looked down at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his promise. He knew this was just the beginning. The beginning of a long and difficult journey. A journey to uncover the truth, to seek justice, and to protect the innocent child who had lost everything. The faintest flicker of a plan, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, began to form in his mind. He would dismantle Huiziho's world piece by piece. He would make him suffer. He would make him pay for what he had done. He would ensure that Jiang Jinji's death would not be in vain. The night was dark, but in the depths of Lu Qinchuan's heart, a cold fire burned, fueled by grief, by anger, and by the unwavering promise he had made to the woman he loved, the woman who lay cold in the morgue, the woman who would soon rise from the ashes of her supposed demise to reclaim her life and her daughter. The antique clock in the hall chimed 7 times, each clang a hammer blow against the fragile peace of the Hua family home. Jiang Jinji watched the second hand sweep its relentless circle, each tick an echo of the emptiness growing within her. Huiziho sat across from her, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone, a furrow etched between his brows. He hadn't spoken to her in over an hour, the silence thicker than the opulent carpet beneath their feet. He used to look at me like that, she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat, when he wanted something. Now, his gaze was distant, focused on something or someone beyond the walls of their gilded cage. Ziho, she began, her voice barely a whisper, a tremor of vulnerability she couldn't quite suppress. He didn't look up. We need to talk. He finally glanced at her, his eyes cold and flat. About what? He didn't bother to hide the irritation in his voice. Jinji swallowed, the lump in her throat growing. About us. About Ruan. About the gaping chasm that has opened between us. About everything, she managed, her voice tighter now, a thread of steel woven into the silk. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the air. We have nothing to talk about. The words hit her like a physical blow, a dull ache spreading through her chest. He doesn't even try anymore. The realization was a cold, hard stone settling in her stomach. Ziho, please, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Our marriage's falling apart. He finally put down his phone, his gaze meeting hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not love, not even affection, but something akin to pity. Jinji, he said, his voice laced with a weary resignation that chilled her to the bone, let's face it. We're done. The days that followed were a blur of bitter arguments and icy silences. Every attempt at conversation ended in a slammed door or a venomous remark. Jinji tried everything, pleading, reasoning, even anger, but nothing seemed to penetrate the wall he had built around himself. He was a ghost in their own home, his presence a constant reminder of what they had lost. Ruan's birthday arrived like a fragile butterfly amidst a storm. Jinji had painstakingly planned a small party, hoping for a semblance of normalcy, a brief reprieve from the suffocating tension. But even the bright balloons and colorful streamers couldn't mask the underlying despair. Huiziho barely acknowledged his daughter's presence, his attention glued to his phone, his fingers tapping out messages that Jinji knew weren't meant for her. The cake sat untouched on the table, the candles long extinguished. Wan, her small face etched with confusion and hurt, clung to Jinji's leg, her silent tears a stark indictment of their broken family. Jinji felt a surge of protective anger, a fierce determination to shield her daughter from the pain that was slowly consuming them all. "Ziho," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "look at her. Look at what you're doing to her." He finally looked up, his eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance flashing across his face. "What am I doing?" he snapped. "I'm here, aren't I?" "Being here isn't enough," Jinji retorted, her voice rising. "She needs a father, not a ghost." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, the sound grating on her nerves. "Let's get a divorce," he said, his voice cold and flat, devoid of any emotion. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jinji stared at him, her mind reeling. Divorce? He's finally saying it. A strange calmness washed over her, a sense of inevitability that she hadn't expected. "Every day I have to face this disgusting face of yours," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'm fucking sick of hearing it." Jinji felt a sharp pang of pain, a knife twisting in her gut. Disgusting? Is that how he sees me now? All the years, all the sacrifices, all the love she had poured into their marriage reduced to a single, hateful word. "We can't get divorced," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea escaping her lips. He laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Why not? You think I care about you anymore?" The argument escalated, their voices echoing through the empty house, each word a poison dart. Wan, caught in the crossfire, started to cry, her small body shaking with fear. In the ensuing chaos, a small porcelain figurine, a cherished gift from Wan's grandmother, tumbled from a shelf, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Wan, startled by the sudden noise, stumbled and fell, her hand landing on a shard of broken porcelain. A scream ripped through the air, followed by the sickening thud of a small body hitting the floor. Jinji rushed to her daughter's side, her heart pounding in her chest. Blood, bright and crimson, flowed from a deep gash on Wan's palm. In that moment, something inside Jinji snapped. The grief, the betrayal, the fear it all coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. She looked up at Ziho, her eyes burning with an icy fury he had never seen before. "This is it," she thought, "this is the end." The charade was over. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood that clung to Ziho's throat. He paced the pristine white corridor, the rhythmic squeak of his polished shoes a counterpoint to the frantic thumping in his chest. Wan. His daughter. His perfect, obedient daughter, now lying unconscious in a room just beyond that closed door. He ran a hand through his hair, the slick-back strands now disheveled, mirroring the chaos churning within him. It was an accident, he told himself, the words a hollow echo in the vast emptiness of his guilt. Just a stupid accident. He hadn't meant to push her, not really. Just a nudge, born of frustration, of the mounting pressure, of Lin Qinghuan's constant nagging. He closed his eyes, her shrill voice a phantom ringing in his ears. "That brat needs to learn her place," she'd hissed, her words laced with venom. Inside, machines beeped rhythmically, a cold, clinical soundtrack to the small figure lying motionless on the stark white bed. A bandage swathed Wan's head, a stark white against her pale skin. Jiang Jinji sat beside her, her hand gently clasped around her daughter's small, limp one. Her heart ached, a dull, persistent throb that resonated with each beep of the machines. She hadn't anticipated this. Her plan, so meticulously crafted, so carefully executed, hadn't factored in this variable. Wan. Her precious daughter, caught in the crossfire of her revenge. She brushed a stray strand of hair from Wanwan's forehead, her touch feather-light. "You'll be all right," she whispered, the words a prayer, a promise, a desperate plea to the universe. The doctor emerged, his face etched with weariness. "She's stable for now," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "But the next few days are critical." Huiziho surged forward, his voice hoarse with a manufactured panic. "Doctor, doctor, please save my daughter. Do whatever it takes." The doctor nodded curtly, already turning away, his mind already occupied with the next crisis. Huiziho sank back against the wall, relief washing over him, momentarily eclipsing the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. "It will be all right," he told himself, latching onto the doctor's words like a lifeline. "Everything will be all right." Days bled into nights, each marked by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the hushed whispers of nurses. Jiang Jinji remained a constant presence, a silent sentinel at Wanwan's bedside. She barely ate, barely slept, her entire world reduced to the small rise and fall of her daughter's chest. She watched Huiziho's performance, his theatrical displays of grief, his hollow pronouncements of love. Each gesture, each word, fueled the fire of her resolve. He would pay. He would pay for everything. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of purple and gray, Wanwan stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with confusion. "Mom," she murmured, her voice weak and raspy. Jiang Jinji leaned closer, her heart clenching with a mixture of relief and anguish. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Wanwan's gaze shifted, settling on the diamond ring on Jiang Jinji's finger, a ring Huiziho had given Lin Qinghuan just days after her supposed death. "Dad will definitely like this gift," she mumbled, her voice drifting off. "That 100,000 ring." A flicker of understanding crossed Jiang Jinji's face. Wanwan had seen. She had seen more than they realized. Later that night, as Wanwan slept, Huiziho entered the room, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't been able to sleep, haunted by Wanwan's words, by the look in her eyes. He approached the bed, his gaze fixed on his daughter's small, fragile form. Suddenly, a voice, cold and sharp as shattered glass, cut through the silence. "You're back." He whirled around, his eyes widening in terror as he saw Jiang Jinji standing in the doorway, her face bathed in the shadows, her eyes burning with an icy fire. His breath caught in his throat, his mind reeling. He'd seen her body, identified her, hadn't he? It couldn't be. The room seemed to spin, the sterile white walls closing in on him, suffocating him. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by a carefully timed anonymous call. They took Huiziho away, his protests echoing through the sterile corridors. Jiang Jinji watched him go, a strange sense of calm settling over her. It was over. Finally, it was over. She turned back to Wanwan, her face softening as she gazed at her sleeping daughter. The fight was far from finished, but she had won this battle. She had protected her daughter. She had avenged her own death. Later, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the hospital window, Lu Qinchuan arrived. He stood silently beside Jiang Jinji, his presence a comforting warmth in the sterile chill of the room. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His understanding, his unwavering support, was a silent promise of a new beginning. Jiang Jinji looked at him, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a future beyond the wreckage of her past. A future where she could be Ling Heyue again. A future where she and Wanwan could finally be free. The Hua family home, once a symbol of Jiang Jinji's carefully constructed life, now felt like a mausoleum. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams, illuminating the hollowness that had settled within its walls. It had been months since her staged death, months spent meticulously crafting her new identity as Ling Hyue, an art consultant with a fabricated past and a burning purpose. Each day, the grief had morphed, hardening into a cold, sharp blade of resolve. Today, the blade was ready to be unsheathed. She stood before the imposing front door, her reflection shimmering in the polished brass. Ling Hyue's face stared back elegant, composed, a stranger to the woman she once was. Beneath the surface, Jiang Jinji's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He won't recognize me, she told herself, the thought both a prayer and a command. He never truly saw me anyway. The door swung open, revealing Lin Qinghuan, draped in Jiang Jinji's favorite silk robe. A bitter taste rose in her throat. Lin Qinghuan's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "Yes?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "I'm Ling Hyue," Jiang Jinji said, her voice smooth and even, each syllable carefully modulated. "I'm here to see Mr. Hua." She extended a gloved hand, a subtle gesture of dominance. Lin Qinghuan's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing her from head to toe. Jiang Jinji held her gaze, a faint amusement playing on her lips. Let her wonder. Let her squirm. "Ziho is busy," Lin Qinghuan said curtly, making a move to close the door. "I'm afraid this is rather important," Jiang Jinji countered, her voice taking on a steely edge. "It concerns a mutual acquaintance." Jiang Jinji. The name hung in the air, a phantom lingering in the grand foyer. Lin Qinghuan's hand froze on the doorknob. Her face paled, a mixture of fear and confusion swirling in her eyes. Jiang Jinji allowed herself a small, inward smile. The hook was set. Moments later, Hua Ziho appeared, his face drawn and haggard. The months hadn't been kind to him. The guilt, which Jiang Jinji had anticipated, gnawed at him, visible in the dark circles under his eyes and the tightness around his mouth. He looked like a man haunted by his own actions, a ghost in his own opulent prison. Seeing him like this, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction, cold and sharp, pierced through Jiang Jinji's carefully constructed facade. "Ling Hyue?" he asked, his voice strained. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. It was the kind of attention he'd once reserved for Jiang Jinji, and the irony wasn't lost on her. "Mr. Hua," Jiang Jinji acknowledged, her voice calm and collected, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within her. "We need to talk." He ushered her into the living room, the same room where they had once shared laughter, tears, and dreams. Now, the air was thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of their shattered past. Lin Qinghuan hovered nearby, her anxiety palpable. Jiang Jinji began to speak, weaving a carefully crafted narrative about a fictitious art deal, subtly interweaving details of Jiang Jinji's life, testing Hua Ziho's reactions. With each word, she watched him unravel, his composure crumbling under the weight of his guilt. He fidgeted, his gaze darting nervously between her and Lin Qinghuan. "He's terrified," she realized, a grim satisfaction settling in her stomach. "He knows, on some level, that the past is catching up to him." Finally, unable to bear the charade any longer, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "Let's get divorced," she said, using his pet name for Jiang Jinji. The words were a carefully chosen trigger, designed to shatter his fragile facade. Hua Ziho's face contorted in a mixture of shock and confusion. What are you talking about?" he stammered. Jiang Jinji continued, her voice laced with a chillingly sweet venom. "Ah, that old hag always causing trouble, even from beyond the grave." The blood drained from his face. You're not," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. A slow smile spread across Jiang Jinji's face, the mask of Ling Heyue finally slipping away. Dead, she finished, her voice dripping with icy triumph. No, Ziho. I'm not dead. The ensuing scene was a blur of accusations, denials, and recriminations. Lin Qinghuan's shriek of disbelief echoed through the house as Huiziho collapsed onto the sofa, his face ashen. The carefully constructed world he had built on lies and deceit was crumbling around him. Jiang Jinji watched it all unfold, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. The anger, the pain, the years of betrayal, it all seemed distant now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had played her hand, and she had won. Later, after the police had taken Huiziho away, after Lin Qinghuan's tearful protests had faded into the night, Jiang Jinji found herself standing on the balcony, overlooking the city lights. The cool night air brushed against her skin, a soothing balm against the turmoil of the day. Lu Qinchuan stood beside her, his presence a silent comfort. He had been her rock throughout this ordeal, her confidant, her protector. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers. It's over, he said softly, his voice filled with warmth and understanding. Jiang Jinji looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It wasn't over, not really. The scars of the past would remain, a permanent reminder of the betrayal and the pain. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. A new chapter was beginning, a chapter where she could finally be free. She squeezed Lu Qinchuan's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the uncertain future that lay ahead, a future she would face, not as Jiang Jinji, the wronged wife, but as Ling Heyue, the woman reborn from the ashes of her past. The air in the Hua family home crackled with a tension so thick it was almost palpable. Jiang Jinji, veiled under the guise of Ling Heyue, watched the meticulously constructed facade of Huiziho's life begin to crumble, brick by carefully placed brick. She moved through the opulent rooms like a phantom, her presence a silent, unsettling pressure. Each carefully chosen word, each seemingly innocent observation, was a sliver of ice driven into the heart of their manufactured domesticity. Huiziho paced, his phone clutched in his hand, the screen illuminating his increasingly haggard features. The lines etched around his eyes seemed deeper, his usual confident swagger replaced by a nervous tick in his jaw. It's working, Jiang Jinji thought, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. He's beginning to doubt. To fear. She had seeded the whispers of Lin Qinghuan's infidelity, carefully crafted insinuations delivered with a feigned concern that gnawed at Huiziho's already fragile ego. He glanced at Lin Qinghuan, perched on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, her manicured nails tapping a restless rhythm against the polished wood. Who was that on the phone? Lin Qinghuan's voice, usually saccharine, was sharp, edged with suspicion. Her eyes, narrowed and calculating, darted between Huiziho and Jiang Jinji. Another one of your business associates? Jiang Jinji noted the subtle tremor in her voice, the flicker of insecurity that belied her outward composure. Just a colleague, Huiziho snapped, his voice clipped. He shoved the phone into his pocket, his movements jerky and abrupt. She suspects, he thought, his stomach twisting into a knot. She knows something's not right. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of his deceit pressing down on him. The image of Jiang Jinji's lifeless face flashed before his eyes, a chilling reminder of the lengths he'd gone to for this life, this woman. A colleague who calls at this hour? Lin Qinghuan pressed, her voice rising. A vein pulsed in her forehead. Don't lie to me, Ziho. You think I'm stupid? Jiang Jinji observed the scene with detached fascination, a grim satisfaction blooming in the desolate landscape of her heart. Like two scorpions in a jar, they were turning on each other, their venomous distrust poisoning the air. You're being paranoid, Huiziho retorted, his patience wearing thin. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, scrutinized. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flitting around the room, as if searching for an escape. He avoided looking at Jiang Jinji, her quiet presence a constant, unnerving reminder of his fractured conscience. The tension ratcheted up another notch when the monthly household accounts arrived. Jiang Jinji, feigning helpfulness, pointed out a discrepancy, a substantial sum transferred to an unknown account. "Is this a new investment, Mr. Hua?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, her eyes veiled. Hua Ziho's blood ran cold. He hadn't authorized any such transfer. He snatched the papers from her hand, his eyes scanning the figures with growing disbelief. He felt a surge of rage, a primal roar building in his chest. He knew, with a sickening certainty, who was responsible. Lin Qinghuan's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed mask of innocence began to crack. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Explain what?" Hua Ziho's voice was dangerously low, his eyes blazing with fury. "Explain how this money ended up in your personal account." He threw the papers at her feet, the crisp sheets scattering like fallen leaves. "You're shameless," he roared, his voice echoing through the house. The carefully curated image of the successful businessman, the loving partner, shattered into a million pieces. "You're making me angry. I'll throw you and one out right now." One, who had been quietly playing in her room, emerged, her small face pale with fright. She clung to the doorway, her eyes wide with fear, witnessing the ugly spectacle unfolding before her. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The sight of his daughter, her innocent eyes reflecting the chaos he had created, brought a flicker of shame to Hua Ziho's face. But the shame was quickly replaced by a surge of panic. He couldn't let her see him like this, weak, vulnerable. He couldn't let her know the truth. Jiang Jinji watched, her heart aching for her daughter, but her resolve hardening. This was the price of her revenge, the collateral damage in her war against deceit and betrayal. She would protect Ruan, even if it meant tearing down everything around them. Later that night, as the police sirens wailed in the distance, signaling Hua Ziho's arrest for Jiang Jinji's supposed murder, a crime he hadn't committed, yet one he was undeniably guilty of in his heart, Jiang Jinji stood on the balcony, the cold night air whipping around her. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, indifferent expanse. Lu Qinchuan stood beside her, his presence a silent comfort. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of understanding. He didn't need words. He knew the burden she carried, the sacrifices she had made. Jiang Jinji closed her eyes, the image of Ruan's frightened face burned into her mind. The road ahead was long, uncertain. But she was no longer alone. She had Lu Qinchuan, and she had her purpose. She would rebuild her life, for herself, and for her daughter. The first fragile tendrils of hope, like delicate seedlings pushing through the hardened earth, began to bloom in the desolate garden of her heart. The opulent chandelier cast a sickly sweet light on the chaos unfolding below. Lin Qinghuan's carefully crafted mask of composure had shattered, replaced by a raw, animalistic fear. Her manicured nails dug into the plush velvet of the hospital waiting room chair, leaving crescent-shaped indentations. "He can't betray me," she thought, the words a desperate mantra against the rising tide of panic. He wouldn't dare. But the cold, calculating glint in Hua Ziho's eyes, the way he avoided her gaze, spoke volumes. He was sacrificing her. Hua Ziho felt the walls closing in. The sterile scent of antiseptic, usually a comfort in his medical director role, now choked him. His carefully constructed world, built on lies and deceit, was crumbling. He saw the ghost of Jiang Jinji in every shadowed corner, in every hushed whisper. It was an accident, he told himself, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was self-defense. But the image of her lifeless body, the way her eyes had stared accusingly up at him, haunted his every waking moment. The rhythmic beeping of Ruanawan's heart monitor was a discordant counterpoint to the turmoil raging within Jiang Jinji. Her daughter, small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, was the anchor that kept her grounded, the fuel that stoked the fires of her resolve. A wave of nausea washed over her as she recalled Lin Qinghuan's chilling confession, the casual cruelty with which she'd admitted to endangering Ruan. "You will pay," she vowed silently, her gaze hardening. "You will both pay. I killed someone." Huaziho's voice was barely a whisper, choked with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the scent of decay. Lin Qinghuan whirled around, her eyes blazing. "You're dying and still trying to frame me," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "Don't you dare drag me down with you." Inside, a cold dread seeped into her bones. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was the end. Her carefully constructed facade, the elaborate lies she'd woven, were unraveling thread by thread. A flicker of amusement danced in Jiang Jinji's eyes, a stark contrast to the grief that had shadowed them for so long. She watched the two of them tear each other apart, their accusations and denials echoing in the sterile confines of the hospital. It was a symphony of destruction, and she was the conductor. "Huaziho, Lin Qinghuan," she said, her voice calm and steady, cutting through the hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm back." The words landed like a bombshell, shattering the fragile illusion of normalcy. Huaziho's blood ran cold. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. It couldn't be. He'd seen her heed the memories, suppressed for so long, flooded back, overwhelming him with their horrifying clarity. Lin Qinghuan's face contorted in a mask of disbelief and terror. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat as if to ward off a physical blow. The carefully constructed world she'd built, the life she'd stolen, crumbled around her like a house of cards. "I'm not dead yet," Jiang Jinji continued, her voice resonating with a power that both terrified and captivated. The air crackled with an almost tangible energy, the weight of her presence filling the room. She looked at Huaziho, her gaze unwavering. "You're suspected of murder." The police officers, alerted by a prearranged signal, moved in swiftly and efficiently. The click of handcuffs, the cold, metallic touch against Huaziho's wrists, was the final punctuation mark on his downfall. He offered no resistance, his spirit broken, his eyes hollow and devoid of life. He was a ghost of his former self, a shell of the man he once was. Lin Qinghuan's screams echoed down the sterile corridors, a desperate, animalistic cry against the inevitable. She clawed at the officers, her nails breaking against their uniforms, her eyes wild with a desperate, frenzied energy. But her struggles were futile. The net had closed, and there was no escape. As they led Huaziho and Lin Qinghuan away, Jiang Jinji felt a strange sense of emptiness. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd planned for so meticulously. Yet, the victory felt hollow, tinged with a profound sadness. The man she had once loved, the father of her child, was now a broken, defeated stranger. A warm hand gently touched her shoulder. She turned to see Lu Qinchuan standing beside her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "It's over," he said softly, his voice a balm to her frayed nerves. "You're safe now." Jiang Jinji looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of her past, she saw a glimmer of hope for the future. Lu Qinchuan's presence was a steady anchor in the storm, a reminder that there was still goodness in the world, that she wasn't alone. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his unwavering support, and allowed herself to finally grieve, to finally heal. The long, dark night was finally over, and the first rays of dawn were beginning to break through the clouds. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew, with a newfound certainty, that she would face it with courage, with resilience, and with the unwavering love for her daughter that had sustained her through the darkest of times. The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was there. A promise of a new beginning, a whisper of hope in the silence that followed the storm. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the living room in a soft, warm glow. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, a silent ballet against the backdrop of a tranquil afternoon. Jiang Jinji watched Ruanruan, her daughter, sketching intently at the low table, her brow furrowed in concentration. A small, contented smile played on Jinji's lips. Peace. A word that for so long felt foreign, impossible, now settled in her heart like a gentle dove. It had been months since the storm, since the meticulously crafted facade of her life had shattered, revealing the festering wounds beneath. The memories, sharp and jagged, still lingered. Huiziho's face contorted in disbelief, the metallic tang of fear in the air, Lin Qinghuan's shrill cries echoing in the courtroom. But these were shadows, receding with each passing day, replaced by the quiet hum of normalcy. Ruanruan, once a timid, withdrawn child, now blossomed under the warmth of genuine care. The fear that had clung to her like a second skin had gradually dissipated, replaced by a nascent confidence, a spark of joy that warmed Jinji from the inside out. The nightmares had lessened, replaced by dreams of ice cream and playground swings. A small victory, but a significant one. Jinji's gaze shifted to the man across the room, absorbed in a book by the fireplace. Lu Qinchuan. His presence, once a secret lifeline, now a constant source of comfort and strength. He had offered them sanctuary, not just within the walls of his elegant home, but within the fortress of his unwavering support. He had believed her when no one else would, had helped her orchestrate the downfall of Huiziho, not for revenge, but for justice, for Ruanruan. Mama, Ruanruan's soft voice broke the silence, pulling Jinji back to the present. Look. I drew you and Uncle Qinchuan. She held up the drawing, a childish depiction of three figures holding hands, bathed in a vibrant yellow sun. A lump formed in Jinji's throat. It's beautiful, Baobei, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Ruanruan beamed, her eyes shining with pride. Lu Qinchuan lowered his book, his gaze softening as he took in the scene. He rose and walked over to the table, crouching beside Ruanruan. May I see? He asked, his voice gentle. Ruanruan eagerly presented her artwork, pointing out the details: the flowers in Jinji's hair, the smile on Lu Qinchuan's face. Jinji watched them, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. This domesticity, this simple, unadulterated happiness, felt surreal after the years of turmoil. A part of her, hardened by betrayal and pain, still struggled to accept this new reality. Could she truly leave the past behind? Could she allow herself to trust, to love again? The doubts whispered in the corners of her mind, insidious and persistent. Later that evening, after Ruanruan had been tucked into bed, Jinji found herself on the terrace with Lu Qinchuan. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a vast, indifferent expanse. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and familiar. Jinji traced patterns on the glass of wine in her hand, her thoughts a tangled mess. She knew Lu Qinchuan was waiting, patiently, for her to speak, to acknowledge the unspoken emotions that hung heavy in the air. Everything ended like a fairy tale, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, failing to capture the complex tapestry of emotions that swirled within her. Gratitude, relief, a flicker of something more. She looked at Lu Qinchuan, his profile etched against the dim light. His gaze was steady, unwavering, filled with an understanding that reached beyond words. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, had witnessed the raw, unfiltered pain that she had so carefully concealed. And yet, he hadn't flinched. He had simply offered his hand, a silent promise of support, of acceptance. "It wasn't a fairy tale, Jinji," he replied, his voice soft yet firm. "It was a battle. You fought bravely, and you won." His words, simple and direct, pierced through the layers of her self-doubt. He saw her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. A warrior. A strange sense of peace settled over her, a quiet acceptance of the past and a tentative embrace of the future. The doubts, though still present, began to lose their sharp edges, their suffocating grip. He turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. "Will you give me a chance to take care of you?" he asked, his voice low and husky, the question hanging in the air between them. Jinji's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet of the night. It wasn't just about romantic love, it was about trust, about rebuilding a life shattered into fragments. It was about offering one a stable, loving home, a chance at a normal childhood. It was about allowing herself to be vulnerable again, to accept the possibility of happiness after so much pain. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just the wealth and influence that had initially drawn her to him, but the genuine kindness, the unwavering loyalty that had sustained her through the darkest of times. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight. She didn't need a fairy tale. She needed a partner, a friend, a family. And in Lu Qinchuan, she had found all three. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. "Yes," she whispered, the word laden with unspoken emotions. "Yes, I will." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was filled with promise, with the quiet hum of a new beginning. The city lights in the distance no longer seemed indifferent, but rather, a reflection of the myriad possibilities that stretched before them, a future painted in the soft, hopeful hues of dawn.